My name is Melanie, and I am 32 years old now, but my fingers still ache with the memory of that night. I was just 10 years old when I dared to ask why Amanda got a juicy steak while I was given cold leftovers. The hammer came down so fast, the crack of my bones, the searing pain. My mother watched in silence as my father laughed. Useless girls like you do not deserve fingers. It took me 20 years. But I finally fed them a revenge they could not swallow. If you are watching right now, let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turned my broken fingers into the power that brought them to their knees. Growing up in rural Pennsylvania in a small, faded blue house with peeling paint meant isolation was built into our family structure. Our nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile down the dirt road, far enough that screams could be muffled by distance and thick pine trees. This isolation was perfect for my father, Harold, a stocky man with perpetually oil-stained hands. From his mechanic job and rigid beliefs about how the world should work, especially when it came to gender roles. My mother, Dorothy, a thin woman with permanently worried eyes, moved through our house like a ghost, always deferring to my father and reinforcing his authority. She was not exactly cruel herself, but her silence and compliance made her equally responsible for what happened in that house. She saved her rare smiles and gentle touches exclusively for my sister. Amanda, my sister, was 2 years younger than me, but somehow occupied a completely different universe within our family. She had blonde curls that my mother lovingly brushed each morning while my brown hair was cut short because it was too much trouble. Amanda received new clothes for school while I wore hand-me-downs from our cousins, but it was not just material things that set us apart. Amanda is delicate, my mother would say, exempting her from household chores. She needs her energy for ballet. Meanwhile, I would be scrubbing toilets, doing laundry, and helping prepare meals that I would never get the best portions of. By age 8, I could cook a full breakfast and clean the kitchen afterwards. My sister was never expected to learn. I tried so hard to earn my parents' approval. In 4th grade, I brought home straight A's, including a special commendation from my science teacher for my volcano project. I placed the report card carefully on my father's recliner, waiting with nervous excitement for him to notice. When he came home, he glanced at it, grunted, and asked where dinner was. Harold, Melanie got all A's, my mother mentioned quietly. That is what she is supposed to do, he replied, not looking up from his newspaper. Not like she has anything else taking up her time. That same year, Amanda brought home a C+ in math and was rewarded with ice cream because at least she tried her best. The message was clear. My achievements were expected and unremarkable. While my sister's mediocrity was celebrated, I began to notice other inequalities too. Sunday dinners featured chicken breasts for my parents and sister, while I got the wings or back. New shoes appeared on Amanda's feet when the slightest scuff marked her old ones, while mine had to be falling apart before replacements were considered. At Christmas, Amanda received thoughtful gifts reflecting her interest while I got practical items like socks or school supplies. The pattern continued through elementary school. My father would ruffle Amanda's hair affectionately when he came home, while barely acknowledging my presence. My mother would ask about Amanda's day at dinner, but rarely mine. When I tried to interject with stories about school achievements or interesting things I had learned, I was often cut off with "do not interrupt" or "nobody likes a By 5th grade, I had developed a theory Perhaps if I excelled enough, they would finally notice me. I threw myself into schoolwork with renewed determination. I joined every free school activity I could, volunteering for extra credit projects and staying late to help teachers. I hoped my parents would be proud of my initiative, but instead they seemed annoyed by the inconvenience of picking me up later. "Why do you always need to be different?" my mother asked one evening after I requested to stay for a science club meeting. "You think you are so special with all these extra activities. Just come home and do your chores like you are supposed to." The confusion I felt began turning to "Lesen, tomento." I watched as Amanda was allowed to join dance classes that cost money while my free school activities were discouraged. I observed how my father would take Amanda fishing on rare days off, teaching her to bait a hook and cast a line, while I stayed home to help my mother with housework. When I was 10, I finally began questioning the unfairness verbally. Why does Amanda get to go to Sarah's birthday party, but I cannot go to Jessica's? I asked one Saturday morning. My mother sighed heavily as though I had asked the most tiresome question, because Amanda was invited specially, and those girls are good influences. "We do not know Jessica's family well enough, but I showed you the invitation." I persisted. "And Jessica is in advanced reading with me." "Enough, Melanie," my father interjected. "Your mother said no? Go clean the bathroom," instead of arguing. Each time I questioned the disparity, the responses grew harsher. "Stop being jealous of your sister. Life is not fair. Get used to it. When you contribute something valuable to this family, maybe you will deserve more." But it was a question about food that finally pushed my father over the edge and changed the course of my life forever. It was a Thursday evening in October when my life fractured. Quite literally, Dot. My father had received a promotion at the auto shop, and my mother had prepared a special dinner to celebrate. The kitchen smelled incredible as I set the table, my stomach growling in anticipation. It had been a long day at school, and I had skipped lunch to finish a book report, hoping to share my good grade with my parents during dinner. When my mother began serving, I watched as thick, juicy steaks were placed on everyone's plates except mine. Instead, I received a small portion of leftover meatloaf from 2 nights before, dry and crumbling. The baked potatoes were similarly distributed with butter and sour cream for everyone. Else, while I got plain rice, even the vegetables were unequally shared. Fresh green beans for them, canned corn for me. I stared at my plate, then at Amanda's, where a perfectly cooked steak oozed pink juices. The inequality was nothing new, but something about this particular night, perhaps my hunger, or perhaps the culmination of years of differential treatment, gave me courage I rarely displayed. "Mom," I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "why does Amanda get steak while I get leftovers?" The table went silent. My father paused mid-chew, his knife and fork suspended over his plate. My mother's hand froze while passing the salt to Amanda. The air seemed to thicken with tension. "What did you say?" My father's voice was quiet, which was always more dangerous than his yelling. I swallowed hard but pressed on. "I just wondered why we are not all having steak for your celebration." My mother jumped in, her voice falsely cheerful. "Melanie, do not be ungrateful. There was not enough steak for everyone, and Amanda needs her protein for dance class tomorrow. But I have a math test, I replied, confusion evident in my voice, and I am bigger than her. Shouldn't I need more food? My father set down his silverware with deliberate slowness. Your sister contributes to this family's reputation with her performances. What do you contribute except complaints? His tone should have warned me to back down, but 10 years of inequality had built up a rare moment of courage. I get good grades and do most of the chores. I just do not understand why that is not enough to get the same food. You know, your place in this family, my mother snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Stop asking questions you already know the answer to. The response stung, but something in me could not stop. But what is my place? Why is it different from Amanda's? My father's face reddened, a vein pulsing at his temple. Amanda smirked slightly, cutting another piece of her steak with obvious satisfaction. The basement door stood open behind my father, and I could see his toolbox on the workbench from where he had been making repairs earlier. I work hard all day to put food on this table, he said, his voice rising. And you have the audacity to question how we distribute it. I just want to understand, I whispered, already regretting my persistence, but unable to back down. What happened next occurred so quickly. I barely had time to process it. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. He stormed to his toolbox, pulled out a hammer, and returned to the table in 3 long strides. Before I could move, he grabbed my right hand, stretching it flat against the table. You want to understand? He growled. Here is something to help you understand your place. The hammer came down hard on my fingers. I heard the crack before. I felt the pain-sickening sound of bones giving way under metal. Then the pain hit white, hot, and blinding. I screamed, trying to pull my hand away, but he held it firmly, bringing the hammer down a second time on my already shattered fingers. Useless girls do not need fingers. He laughed, a terrible sound, devoid of humor. Trash, get scraps. My mother did not intervene. She did not rush to my aid or express horror at what had just transpired. Instead, she spat out, maybe this will teach you to be grateful for what you are given. Amanda's eyes were wide, a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. She continued eating her steak as I cradled my mangled hand, blood dripping onto my untouched plate of leftovers. Clean up your mess, my father ordered, returning to his seat and cutting another piece of steak as if nothing unusual had happened. And stop that noise. You brought this on yourself with your questions. Somehow, through the haze of pain, I managed to stumble to the bathroom where I ran cold water over my swollen, misshapen fingers. No one came to check on me. No one offered ice or bandages. No hospital visit was suggested despite the obvious broken bones. I wrapped toilet paper around my throbbing hand, biting my lip to keep from crying out. When I finally emerged, dinner had concluded as if nothing had happened. My mother was washing dishes, my father was watching television, and Amanda was doing homework at the kitchen table. Your plate is still on the table, my mother said without looking at me. Eat your food and clean up after yourself. I could not use my right hand, but no accommodations were made. I awkwardly ate a few bites of cold food with my left hand, tears silently streaming down my face. No one noticed, or if they did, no one cared. That night, lying in bed with my throbbing hand wrapped in tissues and toilet paper, I realized with absolute clarity that I was alone in a house full of people who were supposed to love me. The knowledge settled into my bones alongside the pain realization that would shape every decision I made from that point forward. The next morning, my hand had swollen to twice its normal size with my fingers bent at unnatural angles and discolored in shades of purple and blue. Movement sent shooting pains up my arm, and I could not stop the tears that sprang to my eyes when I tried to get dressed. "Stop being dramatic," my mother said when she saw me struggling. Here, she tossed me an elastic bandage from the medicine cabinet. "Wrap it up and get ready for school. You are not staying home for something you brought on yourself." With my left hand, I awkwardly wound the bandage around my injured fingers, whimpering when I pulled it too tight. The bandage did little to alleviate the pain or correct the obvious deformity, but it concealed the worst of the bruising. At school, writing was nearly impossible. I attempted to hold my pencil with my left hand, producing shaky, barely legible letters. My teacher, Mrs. Thompson, noticed my struggle and asked what had happened. I caught my hand in the door. I lied. The explanation my mother had instructed me to give: "It is just bruised." Mrs. Thompson looked skeptical but accepted the explanation. "Maybe you should see the nurse," she suggested. My mom said, "It is fine," I insisted, afraid of what would happen if medical professionals became involved. The physical pain was excruciating, but the changes at home proved even more painful. My father began referring to me as Lefty, a cruel reminder of what he had done. "How is Lefty doing with her homework?" he would ask mockingly at dinner. "Is Lefty managing to be useful around the house?" My mother doubled down on her expectations, assigning me the same chores despite my injury. "Figure it out," she would say when I struggled to fold laundry or wash dishes. "This is your lesson in gratitude." The fingers never healed properly. Without medical attention, the bones knit back together incorrectly, leaving me with permanently crooked fingers on my right hand and significantly reduced dexterity. Writing remained difficult, affecting my schoolwork. My once perfect penmanship became a struggle, and my grades began to slip as I could not complete assignments as quickly or neatly as before. "See," my father would say when report cards came home with B's instead of A's, "even with two good hands, you were barely worth keeping around. Now what good are you?" Amanda quickly learned to use the incident to her advantage. If I did not complete one of her chores or questioned anything, she would threaten, "Do you want me to tell Dad you are complaining again? I think he still has his hammer." My parents began using the incident as justification for further mistreatment. "Useless girls do not need new clothes," my father would say when I outgrew my jeans. "Useless girls do not need to go on field trips," my mother would echo, refusing to sign permission slips. The verbal abuse escalated, always circling back to my uselessness and the hammer incident as proof of my inferior status. "Remember when you thought you deserved the same as your sister?" My father would reminisce almost fondly. "Did that hammer knock some sense into you? Or do you need another reminder?" I learned to make myself invisible, speaking only when spoken to, taking up as little space as possible. I completed my chores silently, ate whatever scraps I was given without question, and suppressed any natural inclination to ask for fairness or equality. My survival depended on becoming a ghost in my own home. My academic performance, once my only source of pride, continued to deteriorate. Writing lengthy essays was physically painful, and my confidence had been so damaged that participating in class discussions became terrifying. Teachers who had once praised my intelligence now expressed concern about my lack of effort and attitude problem. See what happens when you get too big for your britches, my mother said after a parent-teacher conference where my declining performance was discussed. You never were as smart as you thought. Amanda, meanwhile, was flourishing. Her mediocre grades were celebrated, her dance recitals attended by extended family, her every minor accomplishment treated as extraordinary. The contrast between our treatments became even more pronounced. Amanda is going places, my father would announce proudly. She will make something of herself. The unspoken implication was always clear-eye, wouldn't it? As the physical pain in my hand became a constant background throb rather than acute agony, I began documenting the abuse in a secret journal. Writing with my left hand was difficult, but I persisted, recording incidents, quotes, and dates. I hid the journal inside a hollowed-out old textbook on my bookshelf, knowing no one in my family would ever touch a book voluntarily. The journal became my silent witness, validation that what was happening was real and not some warped perception on my part. In those pages, I allowed myself to express the anger, confusion, and hurt that I suppressed in daily life. Sometimes I fantasized about escape, about a future where I was free from their control and cruelty. Other times, I simply documented the day's injustices, a litany of small and large abuses that constituted my existence. Today, Dad called me useless 14 times. I wrote in one entry, Mom made me rewash all the dishes because one fork still had food on it. Amanda got to go to the movies while I cleaned the garage. As I approached my teenage years, the journal grew thicker, a testament to years of systematic abuse and the growing certainty that I needed to find a way out. By 14, I had perfected the art of emotional camouflage. At home, I was nearly mute, speaking only when directly addressed, my expressions carefully neutral regardless of the treatment I received. But at school, I began to cultivate a different persona, one that could form connections despite my family's best efforts to isolate me. I befriended Jenna, a quiet girl from my English class, who never asked too many questions about my home life but seemed to understand that something was not right. We would study together in the library after school, giving me legitimate reasons to delay my return home. Her mother sometimes packed extra snacks in her lunch, which she would casually slide my way, noticing perhaps how thin I had become on my diet of family leftovers. Mr. Pearson, my 10th grade English teacher, became another unexpected ally. He noticed my struggle with handwriting, but also recognized something in my writing that others had overlooked. You have a powerful voice in your essays, Melanie, he told me one day after class. Have you ever considered pursuing writing as a career? I shook my head, unable to imagine a future beyond my current imprisonment. Well, you should, he continued, handing me a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. This reminded me of you. Strong, observant, resilient. That book became my first taste of possibility of lives, different from my own, and the power of words to transform experience into something meaningful. I began spending every free moment in the school library, volunteering to help shelve books so I could stay until closing time, minimizing my hours at home. Meanwhile, the contrast between my sister's life and mine grew ever more stark. For her 16th birthday, Amanda received a used but functional car, a privilege explained as necessary for her dance commitments. My 16th birthday passed without acknowledgement. Not even a verbal happy birthday. While college brochures began arriving for Amanda, discussions of my future centered around a single path. You will stay here after graduation, my mother announced one evening, as if stating an obvious fact. Someone needs to help around the house as we get older. And it is not like you have other prospects. Amanda has talent, my father added, unnecessarily. She needs education to develop it. You just need to learn to be useful. I nodded silently while internally my resolve strengthened. I would not stay. I could not stay. But escape would require planning and resources that seemed impossible to acquire under their watchful eyes. I began taking small steps toward independence, volunteering for after-school programs that offered small stipends, saving every dollar by hiding money inside feminine hygiene product wrappers, knowing my father would never touch them. I researched GED programs in case I needed to leave before graduating. I collected information on shelters and assistance programs, carefully covering my tracks by deleting browser histories and using school computers when possible. My journal evolved from a record of abuse to a blueprint for escape, filled with budgets, timelines, and contingency plans. The fantasy of leaving became a concrete goal with practical steps attached. Then disaster struck. While I was at school, my mother conducted one of her periodic room searches and discovered my journal hidden in the textbook. When I arrived home, she and my father were waiting, the journal open on the kitchen table between them. "So, we are abusive?" my father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We provide a roof over your head, food in your stomach, clothes on your back. And this is how you repay us by writing lies about us." "They are not lies," I whispered, finding a shred of courage from somewhere deep inside. The backhanded slap caught me off guard, splitting my lip and sending me stumbling backward. "Everything we have done has been for your own good," my mother insisted, her eyes cold, "to teach you your place in the world. And this is how you thank us." The punishment was swift and comprehensive. My bedroom door was removed since you cannot be trusted with privacy. My meager possessions were sorted through. Anything deemed unnecessary, discarded. The small amount of money I had saved was I was withdrawn from all school activities and driven to and from school by my mother, eliminating any opportunity for independent movement. My isolation became nearly complete. My only contacts outside the family were during school hours, and even those were monitored through frequent check-ins with teachers. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket, muffling my thoughts and draining what little energy I had left. There were days I considered ending my life, seeing no other escape from the prison my home had become. I would stand in the bathroom, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills in the medicine cabinet, calculating how many it would take to ensure I never woke up. What saved me was a small, unexpected kindness. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, saw me weeding the garden one Saturday, noticed my still deformed hand, and approached a fence that separated our properties. "You are working hard," she observed, her voice kind. "Would you like some lemonade when you finish?" My parents were shopping with Amanda one of the rare times I was left alone outside the house. I glanced up, surprised by the friendly overture. That would be nice, I answered cautiously. The hour I spent on Mrs. Wilson's porch, drinking tart homemade lemonade and listening to her stories about growing up during the Great Depression rekindled something I had nearly lost. Here was someone who saw me as a person worthy of kindness and conversation, not as a burden or a servant. You remind me of myself at your age, she told me. Quiet, but watching everything, planning. Her words felt like recognition of something essential about me that even I had started to forget. I was a planner. I was observant, and I could use those qualities to survive and eventually escape. That conversation became a turning point. I realized I needed to be smarter about my plans, more careful, more patient. I resumed my escape preparations with renewed determination, but with greater caution. I created a new hiding place for my savings inside a heating vent in the bathroom. I maintained a facade of complete submission at home while quietly preparing for the day I would leave forever. As my senior year approached, I focused on a single goal: survival until graduation. Whatever came after would be my own choice. The discovery of my secret savings was perhaps inevitable in a household where privacy was non-existent. 3 months before graduation, Amanda was searching the bathroom for a missing earring and noticed the slightly loose heating vent. Her discovery of over $800, painstakingly saved over 2 years, was immediately reported to our parents. My father was waiting when I returned from school, the money spread across the kitchen table like evidence at a trial. Stealing from the family now, he accused, his face flushed with anger. "It is money I earned," I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite the panic rising in my chest from tutoring and shelving books at the library. "Everything in this house belongs to me," he countered, "including you and any money you bring in. What were you planning to do with this? Run away?" The accuracy of his guess startled me into silence, which he correctly interpreted as confirmation. "After everything we have done for you," my mother interjected, her voice thick with feigned hurt, "this is how you repay us, by planning to abandon your family responsibilities." "What responsibilities?" I asked, a rare moment of direct challenge. "To be your servant forever. To always be less than Amanda." My father stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "You ungrateful little trash. We give you a home when we could have thrown you out years ago. We feed you when you contribute nothing. And this is your response? Trash gets scraps." My mother spat, repeating the cruel mantra that had defined my existence for years. Amanda leaned against the doorframe, watching the confrontation with undisguised pleasure. "I always knew you were plotting something," she said. "You think you are so smart, but you are really just pathetic." Something broke inside me in that moment, but not in the way they expected. Instead of crumbling under their cruelty, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity that had eluded me during years of abuse. "Keep the money," I said quietly. "It does not matter anymore." My apparent surrender seemed to satisfy them. My father pocketed the cash. My mother resumed preparing dinner, and Amanda smirked triumphantly before returning to her room. They believed they had broken me completely, crushed my final hope of escape. They were wrong. That night, alone in my doorless bedroom, I made a decision I would not run away half prepared with insufficient resources. Instead, I would bide my time, appearing completely defeated while secretly formulating a better plan. Graduation was still possible, and with it, my 18th birthday and legal freedom from their control. Over the next weeks, I projected an image of total compliance and resignation. I performed my chores without complaint, accepted whatever scraps they provided without question, and never mentioned the future. I even stopped spending extra time at school, coming directly home each day as if I had accepted my fate. Finally learned your lesson, Lefty. My father asked one evening. Apparently pleased by my submission, I nodded silently, eyes downcast, while internally calculating exactly how many days remained until graduation. My new strategy was simpler but required perfect timing. Rather than accumulating money they could discover and confiscate, I arranged everything in advance. I spoke privately with Mr. Pearson, explaining as much of my situation as I dared. I need to leave immediately after graduation. I told him, is there any chance, of somewhere I could stay temporarily just until I find work? His concern was evident, but he respected my boundaries. My sister runs a women's shelter in Pittsburgh, he said after some consideration. I can call her, see if they have space. You would have resources there, people who could help you get on your feet. With that cornerstone in place, the rest of my plan came together. I arranged for my few important documents, birth certificate and social security card to be stored in my locker at school. I packed a small bag with essentials and hid it in a seldom-used storage closet at school. I purchased a bus ticket to Pittsburgh using the library computer, scheduling it for the evening of graduation. The morning of graduation arrived with an air of tension. My parents had made it clear they would not be attending the ceremony, a decision I secretly celebrated. Watching you get a diploma you do not deserve is not worth closing the shop early. My father had announced the previous evening, and someone needs to prepare Amanda for her dance recital next week, my mother added. I nodded obediently, concealing my relief. Their absence would make my escape infinitely easier. I left for school that morning with nothing unusual in my appearance or behavior, offering the same quiet goodbye I always did. My mother barely looked up from helping Amanda with her hair. My father had already left for work. At school, I changed into my graduation gown in the bathroom, tucking my regular clothes into my prepared bag. The ceremony passed in a blur. My name called with no cheers from the audience, no proud parents taking photos. Mr. Pearson caught my eye as I crossed the stage, giving me an encouraging nod. As other students reunited with families for celebrations. I slipped away to the bus station 3 blocks from the school. The ticket counter attendant barely glanced at me as I exchanged my reservation for an actual ticket. I boarded the bus to Pittsburgh at 6:30, claiming a window seat near the back. As the bus pulled away from the station, I allowed myself to look back at the town that had been my prison for 18 years. No one had followed me. No one had noticed my absence yet. The realization was both liberating and painful, a final confirmation of how little I mattered to the people who should have loved me most. Only when the town disappeared from view did I finally permit myself to cry, silent tears of relief, grief, and tentative hope streaming down my face as the bus carried me toward an uncertain but self-determined future. The women's shelter in Pittsburgh was a revelation, a place where kindness was the default rather than a rare exception. The director, Mr. Pearson's sister, welcomed me without judgment, showing me to a small but private room with a bed dresser and, most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. "The bathroom is shared," she explained, "but you will have this space to yourself for as long as you need it, up to 3 months, typically, while residents get on their feet." 3 months seemed simultaneously generous and terrifyingly brief. I had escaped, yes, but with nothing except a high school diploma, deformed fingers, and a lifetime of being told I was worthless. The first few weeks were overwhelming. The shelter provided basic necessities and connections to social services, but the process of building a life from scratch proved daunting. I applied for entry-level jobs at every business within walking distance, facing rejection after rejection. My awkward handwriting made applications difficult, and my lack of experience or references limited my options. Eventually, I secured part-time positions, morning shifts at a local bakery washing dishes and cleaning, and evening work at a convenience store stocking shelves. The hours were long, the pay minimal, but the independence was intoxicating. For the first time, my earnings were my own, not subject to confiscation or control at the shelter. I met Zoe, a 23-year-old woman escaping an abusive relationship. We formed a cautious friendship, bonding over late-night cups of tea in the communal kitchen. "You never talk about your family," she observed one evening, "but your hand, those scars, they tell part of the story." I flexed my crooked fingers automatically. A habit developed when uncomfortable. My father broke them with a hammer when I was 10. I admitted the first time I had spoken the truth aloud to anyone, because I asked why my sister got steak while I got leftovers. Zoe did not respond with horror or pity reactions I had feared. Instead, she simply nodded. "My ex broke my ribs because I asked if I could visit my mother," she said. "Some people cannot stand any challenge to their control." That simple recognition that what had happened to me was objectively wrong rather than deserved cracked something open inside me. I began to speak more freely about my experiences. First with Zoe, then with Susan, and eventually with a counselor at the community mental health center. As my 3-month stay at the shelter neared its end, Zoe proposed a solution to our shared housing dilemma. "I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Lawrenceville," she said. "It is not fancy, but the rent is manageable if we split it. Want to be roommates?" The apartment was indeed basic worn carpets, outdated appliances, thin walls, but it had locks on the doors, equal-sized bedrooms, and no one monitoring my food intake or movements. It felt like a palace. With stable housing secured, I turned my attention to education. The community college offered evening classes that would work around my employment schedule, and I discovered financial aid options for low-income students. I enrolled in basic courses, including a creative writing class that rekindled my love of words. Professor Winters, the writing instructor, pulled me aside after reading my first assignment. "Your perspective is unique," she said. "Raw, honest, unflinching. Have you considered pursuing writing more seriously?" I shook my head, still unable to imagine myself as someone with valuable contributions to make. "Well, you should," she insisted, echoing Mr. Pearson's words from years before. There is a scholarship for promising writers. The deadline is next month. I would be happy to help you apply. The scholarship application required a personal essay. After much deliberation, I wrote about my hands about how physical disability from childhood abuse had shaped my relationship with writing, making it simultaneously more difficult and more essential. I described learning to write with my left hand, the pain and determination involved, and how words became my refuge when everything else was taken away. 2 months later, I received notification that I had won, providing enough funding to reduce my work hours and focus more on education. For the first time, my injury, the visible evidence of my father's cruelty, had become a source of opportunity rather than limitation. Around this time, I received news from my hometown through an unexpected source. Mrs. Wilson, my elderly neighbor, had gotten my address from Mr. Pearson and sent a letter. Amanda had left for college with significant financial support from our parents. My father's business was struggling due to a new auto shop opening nearby. My mother had been telling people I had run off with a bad crowd to explain my absence. Most significantly, Mrs. Wilson mentioned that my parents seemed to be aging rapidly, with my father developing heart problems and my mother complaining of arthritis that made housework difficult. They seem to expect your sister to come home and help during breaks, she wrote. But from what I gather, she has other plans. I felt a complex mixture of emotions reading this news and no satisfaction in their struggles, but no sympathy either. They had made their choices, created the family dynamic that guaranteed their daughter would flee at the first opportunity and never look back. Over the next 2 years, I established a stability I had never known. My grades were excellent. I moved from the convenience store to a better-paying administrative position at a local insurance office, and I began publishing short essays in the college literary magazine. Therapy helped me process my childhood trauma. Though the nightmares and reflexive flinching at sudden movements persisted through it all, I kept journals, continuing the practice that had sustained me during my darkest times. But these new journals were different, focusing on recovery and growth rather than just documenting abuse. I began to see patterns in my writing resonated with readers and a voice that was distinctly my own. The idea for the memoir began as a suggestion from my therapist. Writing your story might help you process it more fully, she proposed, not just for yourself, but potentially for others who have experienced similar trauma. Initially, I resisted. Publishing my experiences felt too exposing, too vulnerable, but the idea took root, growing stronger as I continued my education and developed confidence in my writing abilities. By my 3rd year in Pittsburgh, I had begun drafting chapters, transforming raw journal entries into a cohesive narrative. The process was painful but cathartic, requiring me to revisit memories I had tried to suppress. I wrote about the hammer, the unequal meals, the stolen money, the systematic undermining of myself. I wrote about escape, about rebuilding, about learning to trust and be trusted. I wrote with unflinching honesty, but also with growing compassion, both for my past self and for the broken people who had raised me. When the manuscript was complete, I submitted it to small publishing houses that specialize in memoirs and social issues. The 3rd submission resulted in an acceptance letter and a modest advance. Broken, a memoir of survival and reclamation, would be published the following spring. As the publication date approached, I vacillated between pride and terror. My private pain would become public, my family's cruelty exposed. I had used pseudonyms for everyone except myself, but anyone from my hometown would recognize the characters and situations immediately. A week before the book's release, I received another letter from Mrs. Wilson. My father had suffered a major heart attack. He was expected to recover, but would require significant care. My mother was overwhelmed, and Amanda had made it clear she would not be interrupting her graduate studies to return home and help. "They are asking about you," Mrs. Wilson wrote, "wondering if anyone knows how to reach you." I sat with the letter for hours, considering my response. They had broken more than my fingers. They had broken my trust, my sense of safety, my childhood, but I had rebuilt myself without them, stronger. In the broken places, I did not respond to their indirect inquiry. Instead, I sent Mrs. Wilson an advanced copy of my book with a note, "Thank you for the lemonade and hope when I needed both most desperately." The memoir was about to change everything, though not in ways any of us could fully anticipate. Brokum. A memoir of survival and reclamation was released with little fanfare. The publisher had arranged a small book tour, mostly local bookstores and community centers in Pittsburgh and surrounding areas. I had modest expectations, hoping the book might reach others who had experienced similar abuse and show them that escape and healing were possible. What I had not anticipated was the book's impact beyond that specific audience. A prominent reviewer described it as unflinching and essential reading, exposing the quiet brutality that can exist behind closed doors. A radio host who had survived child abuse championed it on her program. A university professor added it to her Psychology of Trauma course reading list. Sales began to climb steadily, then exponentially, when a national morning show featured a segment on child abuse that mentioned my memoir as recommended reading. Within 2 months, the book entered the New York Times bestseller list, catapulting my private pain into very public discourse. The first indication that news had reached my hometown came via email from Mr. Pearson. "Your parents are telling everyone the book is fiction, that you have always been mentally unstable and prone to exaggeration," he wrote. "But those of us who saw your hand, who noticed how you flinched when someone raised their voice, we know the truth." I had been braced for denial, but the reality of it still stung. My mother had apparently told the local church group that I had broken my own fingers in a bid for attention, then blamed my father. My father was portraying himself as the victim of a money-hungry daughter trying to profit from sensationalized lies. Amanda had joined their defense, giving interviews to local newspapers describing me as always jealous and making up stories to explain why she was not as successful or talented